Morgan Andrews, 38, never expected her family to turn on her like this. As she stared at the $15,000 bill her sister had slammed on her kitchen counter, her hands trembled with disbelief. "You owe us this," her sister hissed. "After what you did, this is the least you can do." Little did Morgan know this confrontation would unearth a 20-year family secret that would destroy everything she thought she knew about herself. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into this shocking family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This story about betrayal and family secrets completely changed my perspective on blood loyalty. If you've ever experienced family drama that blindsided, you hit that subscribe button and like this video. Trust me, you won't believe how this revenge story unfolds. Now let's continue. Morgan had always prided herself on building a life of order and stability. At 38, she had carved out a respectable existence as a financial advisor in Boston, helping others secure their futures while meticulously planning her own. Her downtown condo overlooking the harbor represented years of careful saving and professional advancement, a testament to her disciplined approach to life that stood in stark contrast to her sister Valerie's chaotic existence. The sisters had never been particularly close. 3 years apart in age, they had grown up under the same roof, but seemed to exist in parallel universes. While Morgan excelled academically and followed a straight path through college to her professional career, Valerie had struggled through school, bounced between jobs, and eventually settled into a pattern of relying on their parents' generosity to support herself and her son Tyler. Morgan's relationship with her nephew had always been complicated. She sent birthday and Christmas gifts, made appearances at major milestones, but maintained a careful distance. Something about Tyler made her uncomfortable not because of anything he did, but because of an inexplicable sense of guilt that surfaced whenever she saw him. She had always attributed this feeling to her discomfort around children in general, having decided early in life that motherhood wasn't for her. Her parents had seemed to accept her child-free lifestyle, though they occasionally dropped hints about grandchildren during holiday gatherings. They had Valerie's son after all, and that seemed enough to satisfy their desire for continuation of the family line. Morgan had built her life around her career, her small circle of close friends, and her boyfriend of 3 years, Daniel, who shared her disinterest in having children. The weekend had begun like any other. Morgan had spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market, selecting fresh produce for the week ahead. She had just finished arranging her groceries in the refrigerator when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday. When she opened the door to find Valerie standing there, Morgan's first thought was that something terrible had happened. Her sister rarely visited without warning, and the tight expression on her face suggested urgency. But nothing could have prepared Morgan for what Valerie carried, a thick manila envelope clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "We need to talk," Valerie said, pushing past Morgan into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Morgan followed her sister into the kitchen, where Valerie immediately began pacing. At 41, Valerie still possessed the restless energy that had defined her youth. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and deep lines had formed around her mouth and eyes. Tyler got accepted to Cornell, Valerie announced abruptly. "That's wonderful," Morgan replied, cautiously unsure why this news required an in-person visit. "Congratulations." "He must be thrilled." "He is. We all are. It's what he's worked for." "Well, I'd be happy to take him shopping for dorm supplies, or we don't need dorm supplies," Valerie interrupted, slapping the envelope down on Morgan's spotless granite countertop. "We need this." Morgan stared at the envelope, making no move to open it. "What is it? $15,000? Valerie said, her voice flat. "For his first semester." "It's what you owe us." The words hit Morgan like a physical blow. "What I owe you?" For what Valerie's laugh held no humor. "Don't play dumb, Morgan. It doesn't suit you. You know exactly what this is about. Mom and Dad have covered for you for 19 years, but they can't anymore. Dad's medical bills wiped out their savings. It's your turn to step up." Morgan felt the room tilt slightly. "I honestly have no idea what you're talking about." "Fine," Valerie snapped, yanking open the envelope and pulling out a stack of papers. "You want to do this the hard way? Let's do it the hard way." As Valerie spread the documents across the counter, Morgan's perfect ordered world began to crumble beneath her feet. The familiar sense of guilt that had plagued her for years suddenly took on a terrifying new dimension, as if a shapeless shadow had suddenly stepped into the light, revealing a monstrous form she could no longer deny. "These are adoption papers," Morgan whispered, her fingers hovering over the documents spread across her kitchen counter. The black and white forms filled with legal jargon and signatures seemed to pulse with accusation. "Yes," Valerie confirmed, her voice tight with years of suppressed anger. "Tyler's adoption papers. Signed by Mom and Dad 19 years ago." Morgan's mind refused to process the implication. "But that would mean that he's your son." Valerie finished her words, slicing through the air like a blade. "The baby you abandoned. The baby you pretended never existed." Morgan collapsed onto a kitchen stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in as memories she had long suppressed began to surface, fragmented, distorted, but unmistakably real. "That's not possible," she managed to say, though a terrible certainty was already taking root in her chest. "I never had a baby." Valerie's face contorted with disgust. "Wow. You've been telling yourself that lie for so long, you actually believe it, don't you? How convenient for you to just erase him from existence." Morgan's hands trembled as she forced herself to look more closely at the documents. There on the line designated for the birth mother was her signature, or what appeared to be her signature. The date corresponded to her sophomore year of college, a period Morgan remembered as particularly stressful, though the specific details had always remained hazy in her memory. "I don't remember any of this," Morgan said, her voice barely audible. "Bullshit," Valerie spat. "You were 19. You got pregnant. You hid it from everyone except Mom and Dad. You made them promise never to tell anyone, including me. You gave birth and then went right back to college as if nothing had happened." Each word hit Morgan like a physical blow. Fragments of memories began to surface, a period of unexplained weight gain she had attributed to stress eating, a semester break she had supposedly spent at a study program in another state, a recurring nightmare of crying that wouldn't stop. Mom and Dad took him in. Valerie continued relentlessly. "They told everyone they were adopting a baby because they wanted another child. They never told me the truth until 5 years ago, when Tyler started asking questions about his birth parents." Morgan stared at her sister in horrified fascination. "They raised him as yours." "No," Valerie's voice rose in frustration. "They raised him as their own. As my brother. Do you have any idea how it felt to learn that my nephew was actually my nephew? That my parents had been keeping this secret for 14 years, that my perfect sister had abandoned her own child and continued on with her pristine life?" While the rest of us dealt with the consequences, Morgan felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "If what you're saying is true, it is true. Then why didn't they ever tell me? Why keep it from me all these years?" Valerie laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Because you made them promise. According to Mom, you had some kind of breakdown after the birth. You refused to hold him, refused to even look at him. You made them swear they would never tell anyone, especially you. You said you wanted to pretend it never happened, that you couldn't handle it." Morgan shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't remember. I swear I don't remember." "Well, start remembering," Valerie said coldly. "Because your son needs you now. Not to be his mother, it's way too late for that, but to take financial responsibility for once in your life." As Morgan stared at the documents, a terrible fragmented memory surfaced. A hospital room, the sound of crying, her mother's concerned face, and an overwhelming feeling of panic that threatened to consume her entirely. She had always attributed these flashes to anxiety dreams, but now they took on a horrifying new context. "Does Tyler know?" Morgan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you're his birth mother? Yes. Mom and Dad told him when he turned 18. They thought he deserved to know the truth before college." "And what did he say?" Valerie's expression softened slightly the first crack in her armor of anger. He was shocked, confused, hurt. He couldn't understand how someone could give away their child and then pretend they never existed. Morgan felt as though she were drowning, struggling to make sense of a reality that contradicted everything she had believed about herself. "I need to talk to Mom and Dad. They're not going to contradict anything I've told you," Valerie said. "They've protected you for 19 years, Morgan. They're done." Morgan looked up at her sister, seeing her as if for the first time, the premature lines around her eyes, the gray in her hair, the weight of responsibility evident in her bearing. Had Valerie been carrying this burden all along? Had Morgan's alleged actions shaped not only her own life, but her entire family's? "I need time to process this," Morgan said weakly. "Tyler doesn't have time," Valerie replied, tapping the bill for Cornell's tuition. "He starts in 6 weeks, and after covering Dad's medical expenses, there's nothing left. They mortgaged their house to give him the life you denied him. The least you can do is help him get the education he deserves." As Morgan stared at her sister, the perfectly constructed narrative of her life began to unravel, revealing a darker truth that had been hidden beneath the surface all along. The inexplicable guilt she had felt around Tyler, the strange gaps in her memory, her absolute certainty that motherhood wasn't for her, all of it took on a sinister new meaning in light of Valerie's revelation. If what Valerie said was true, Morgan wasn't the person she had believed herself to be. She wasn't the responsible, ethical woman who had built a life based on careful choices and moral clarity. She was someone who had abandoned her own child, erased him from her consciousness, and left others to bear the responsibility of her actions. And now, 19 years later, that abandoned child needed something from her. Not love, not recognition, not even acknowledgement, just financial support. The irony wasn't lost on Morgan. She, a financial advisor who helped others plan for their family's futures, had failed to plan for her own flesh and blood. Morgan spent the next 48 hours in a state of emotional paralysis. After Valerie left taking the documents with her, but leaving the tuition bill behind, Morgan had called in sick to work on Monday, something she had never done without genuine illness. She needed time to grapple with the revelation that had shattered her identity. Her first instinct had been to call her parents, but something stopped her. A deep primitive fear of what they might confirm prevented her from reaching for the phone. Instead, she found herself digging through old photo albums and boxes of memorabilia from her college years, searching for any evidence that might support or contradict Valerie's claims. The sophomore year in question was surprisingly underrepresented in her collection of photographs. There were pictures from the beginning of the fall semester, Morgan with her roommates, Morgan at a football game, and then a strange gap until late spring. She had always attributed this to the intensity of her studies that year, but now the absence took on a sinister significance. Even more disturbing was her discovery of a journal from that period hidden at the bottom of a box of college textbooks she had never unpacked after her last move. The entries started normally enough, detailing classes and social activities, but abruptly stopped in October. When they resumed in March, the writing was different, more measured, less spontaneous, as if written by someone determined to maintain strict control. March 15th, back to normal now. Everyone's been so understanding about my mono. Lost time to make up, but I can do this. Just need to focus on the future. There was no mention of a pregnancy, no reference to a child, but the conspicuous absence spoke volumes. It was as if she had meticulously excised a chapter from her life, leaving only the faintest seam where the pages had been removed. By Tuesday morning, Morgan could no longer bear the uncertainty. She called her parents' home in Connecticut, her heart pounding as she waited for someone to answer. "Hello," her mother's voice, warm and familiar, sent a wave of conflicting emotions through Morgan. "Mom," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "we need to talk about Tyler." The silence that followed was confirmation enough. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was resigned, as if she had been waiting 19 years for this call. "Valerie came to see you?" "Yes." "I told her it wasn't the right approach, but she's angry. She has been since she found out." Morgan closed her eyes, her worst fears confirmed by her mother's implicit acknowledgement. "So it's true." Another pause. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true." The simple confirmation demolished the last of Morgan's denial. She sank onto her couch phone, clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you asked us not to?" her mother replied softly. "You were so adamant. The doctors said you had experienced a traumatic dissociative episode after the birth. They advised us to respect your wishes, to give you time to process it in your own way." 19 years isn't time, Mom. It's a lifetime. Tyler's lifetime. I know. Her mother's voice cracked. "We thought we were doing the right thing. For everyone, you seemed so fragile after." And then, as time passed, it became harder to know how or when to tell you. You had built this life for yourself, and we were afraid of what the truth might do to you. So, you raised him yourselves. It wasn't a question. "We loved him from the moment we saw him," her mother said, a defensive note entering her voice. "We gave him everything we could. We never once regretted it. And Dad's medical bills, is that part true too? Yes. The heart surgeries last year, the insurance only covered so much. We had to remortgage the house." Morgan thought about her father, always so strong and vital, reduced to depending on a pacemaker and a regimen of medications. He had been the one to teach her about financial responsibility, about planning for the future. And now their future was mortgaged to pay for his survival. "Why didn't you come to me for help?" Morgan asked, though she already knew the answer. "How could we?" Her mother responded, pain evident in her voice. "After everything we kept from you, after raising your son without ever telling you, we couldn't bear to ask you for money on top of everything else." Morgan thought about the tuition bill sitting on her kitchen counter. $15,000. A significant sum, but not an impossible one for someone with her income. She had spent nearly that much on her last vacation with Daniel. "I want to meet him," she said, suddenly surprising herself with the certainty of the decision. "Tyler, I want to talk to him." Her mother's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "Are you sure that's wise? He's still processing everything. Learning about you, about the adoption. It might be better to give him space." "I've given him 19 years of space," Morgan replied, a strange calm settling over her. "I think that's enough." After ending the call with her mother, Morgan sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing the confirmation of her worst fears. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached for her laptop and opened her banking app. The transfer of $15,000 to her parents' account took less than a minute to complete a strangely anticlimactic action for such a momentous decision. But money was the easy part. Facing the son she had no memory of giving birth to that would require a courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The campus coffee shop buzzed with the energy of summer session students, creating a backdrop of white noise that Morgan found oddly comforting as she waited. She had chosen a small table in the corner, partially obscured by a large potted plant, giving her a clear view of the entrance while providing some semblance of privacy. Tyler had agreed to meet her reluctantly, according to Valerie, who had served as the intermediary for this arrangement. The meeting had been set for 2:00 p.m., and as the minute hand of Morgan's watch ticked toward the appointed time, she felt a mounting panic that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. What did one say to the child they had given up and forgotten? What possible explanation could she offer that wouldn't sound like a hollow excuse? At precisely 2:03, the door swung open and Morgan's heart stopped. She recognized him instantly, though she had not seen him since Christmas 2 years ago. At 19, Tyler had grown into his lanky frame, standing well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that hinted at regular physical activity. His dark hair, her hair was cut short on the sides, but left longer on top in the current style. He scanned the coffee shop with an intensity that reminded her painfully of herself. Their eyes met across the room, and Morgan saw the moment of recognition, followed immediately by a flicker of something darker, resentment perhaps, or simply discomfort. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before making his way toward her table, navigating between clusters of students with a deliberate grace. "Tyler," she said, rising as he approached. "Thank you for coming." He nodded curtly, sliding into the chair across from her without offering a handshake or any other form of greeting. "Aunt Morgan," he said, the familial title landing like a slap. "Or should I call you something else now?" The question caught her off guard. "Whatever you're comfortable with," she managed. A barista appeared at their table, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. Tyler ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. Morgan asked for the same, though she rarely drank coffee in the afternoon. When they were alone again, an awkward silence descended. Morgan had rehearsed this conversation countless times over the past few days, but now faced with the reality of Tyler's presence, all her prepared remarks seemed woefully inadequate. "I paid your tuition," she said, finally immediately regretting the transactional nature of the statement. Tyler's expression hardened. "So I heard." "Is that supposed to make everything okay?" "No," Morgan replied quickly. "Of course not. I wanted you to know you don't need to worry about that part." "I never worried about it," Tyler said, his tone deliberately casual. "Grandpa always said education was the best investment. I knew they'd figure it out somehow." The barista returned with their coffees, and Tyler immediately wrapped his hands around the mug, though the summer day was warm. Morgan recognized the gesture as one her father often made a seeking of comfort in the warmth of the ceramic. "They didn't tell me," Morgan said, after another uncomfortable silence. "About you. About the adoption." "I know that sounds impossible, but it's true." Tyler studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Mom," Aunt Valerie said, "you had some kind of breakdown, that you blocked it all out." Morgan nodded, relieved that he had at least been prepared for this part of the conversation. "That's what they tell me. I don't remember the pregnancy or the birth. I have fragments, bits and pieces that never made sense until now." "Convenient," Tyler remarked, taking a sip of his coffee. The comment stung, but Morgan couldn't blame him for his skepticism. "I've been seeing a therapist since I found out she offered." Trying to understand what happened. Apparently, it's called dissociative amnesia. It can happen with trauma. Trauma. Tyler repeated the word flat in his mouth. "You mean having me? I don't know," Morgan admitted. "I honestly don't remember. I was 19 in college, probably terrified." "Were you alone?" Tyler asked suddenly. "My father, was he not around?" The question caught Morgan off guard. In all the turmoil of the past week, she had given little thought to the other half of Tyler's genetic makeup. "I don't know," she said again, hating how inadequate the response was. "If I was seeing someone then, it's another blank spot." Tyler nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "So you don't remember anything about him either? I'm sorry." "I used to make up stories about him," Tyler said, a distant look crossing his face. "When I was younger, before I knew I was adopted. I'd tell the other kids he was a fighter pilot or a deep-sea explorer. Something exciting to explain why he wasn't around. Morgan felt a twist of pain at the image of a young Tyler, constructing elaborate fantasies to fill the void of an absent father, a void she had created. Your grandparents never said anything about him. They said they didn't know. That you never told them. Tyler fixed her with a penetrating gaze. Was that true, or just another lie to protect me? Or you, Morgan, searched her fragmented memories, trying to extract any information that might give Tyler what he was looking for. I honestly don't know, but I want to find out if I can. For both of us. Tyler's expression softened slightly the first crack in his armor of resentment. I thought about trying to find you, after they told me the truth. I even started looking into those DNA ancestry services. The thought of Tyler discovering her identity through a commercial DNA test without any preparation or context sent a chill through Morgan. What stopped you, Grandma? He said simply. She asked me to wait. She said you were fragile. The word echoed what her mother had told her on the phone. I'm not fragile, Tyler. Morgan paused, searching for the right word. I'm incomplete. There's a part of my history, our history, that's missing. I want to find it if I can. For the first time since sitting down, Tyler met her gaze directly. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own confusion and pain, but also a resilience that must have come from years of wondering, of constructing an identity in the absence of crucial information. Why now? He asked. After all these years, is it just because Valerie showed up asking for money? The question was fair, and Morgan considered it carefully before responding. That was the catalyst she acknowledged. But once I confirmed it was true. I couldn't go back to not knowing. I can't explain what happened 19 years ago, at least not yet, but I can try to make better choices now. Tyler took another sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. What do you want from me? The directness of the question caught Morgan off guard. I don't want anything from you, she said, then immediately recognized the unintended echo of her apparent rejection of him as an infant. What I mean is, I don't have expectations. I don't expect you to forgive me or to welcome me into your life. I want to know you, if you'll let me. Hey everyone, can you believe the bombshell that just dropped in Morgan's life? This family secret is just starting to unravel, and I can feel your anticipation through the screen. If you're enjoying this real-life drama about family secrets and unexpected reunions, please hit that like button. Are you Team Morgan or Team Tyler at this point? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's see what happens next as Morgan tries to repair the damage of 19 years. Tyler studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for some sign of insincerity or manipulation. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed satisfied enough to continue the conversation. Grandma says, I look like you, he said, changing the subject abruptly. Around the eyes? And that I have your brain, the way I analyze problems, break things down into components. That's why I'm majoring in engineering. Morgan felt a surge of pride mixed with grief for all the milestones she had missed. You always were good at puzzles, she offered, remembering the few family gatherings where she had interacted with him. Even as a little kid. You noticed that Tyler seemed genuinely surprised. Of course, Morgan replied, though the truth was more complicated. She had observed him from a distance, always maintaining that inexplicable boundary, always feeling that strange discomfort that now made perfect sense. As their conversation continued, moving cautiously from Tyler's academic interests to his plans for Cornell, Morgan felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but a tentative willingness to explore this new complicated family relationship. By the time they finished their coffees, they had agreed to meet again the following week. Outside the coffee shop, standing in the warm summer sunshine, Morgan took a risk. I'd like to help with more than just tuition, she said, if you'll let me. Tyler regarded her with guarded curiosity. "What did you have in mind?" "Whatever you need. Books, housing, spending money, all of it." She hesitated, then added, "It's not about buying your forgiveness. I just want to do what I should have been doing all along." Tyler nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'll think about it," he said, which wasn't a no. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure merging with the crowd of students on the sidewalk, Morgan felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the years, lost fear of what more she might discover about herself, but also a tentative hope that something valuable might still be salvaged from the wreckage of the past. What she didn't know was that Tyler had already begun his own investigation into the events of 19 years ago, an investigation that would uncover truths even more devastating than what she had learned so far. The manila envelope arrived at Morgan's condo exactly 1 week after her meeting with Tyler. There was no return address, but she recognized the careful, precise handwriting as her nephew's, no, her son's. The cognitive adjustment still caused her a moment of mental vertigo whenever she was forced to acknowledge the reality of their biological connection. Inside, she found a stack of documents, medical records, photocopies of letters, and a handwritten note from Tyler that simply said, "I found these in a box in the attic at Grandma and Grandpa's. I thought you should see them." Morgan spread the papers across her dining room table, her hands trembling slightly as she began to examine them. The first was a hospital admission form dated January 15th, 19 years earlier. Her name was printed neatly at the top, followed by her parents' contact information. The reason for admission: pregnancy labor induced at 38 weeks due to preeclampsia. She stared at the form, trying to connect herself to the young woman described in the clinical language of the medical record. According to the document, she had been conscious and alert upon admission, with elevated blood pressure and protein in her urine, classic signs of the pregnancy complication. There was nothing to suggest she had been in a state of psychological distress at that point. The next document was a birth certificate. Tyler James Andrews, born January 16th at 3:47 a.m. Mother Morgan Elizabeth Andrews. Father unknown. Morgan traced her finger over the word unknown, feeling a strange sense of dislocation. Who was the man whose DNA Tyler carried? Why couldn't she remember him? As she continued through the documents, a more complex picture began to emerge. There were discharge papers indicating she had remained in the hospital for 5 days after the birth, unusual for an uncomplicated delivery. Attached was a psychiatric consult note that used terms like acute stress reaction and dissociative symptoms. The psychiatrist had recommended follow-up care and possible medication, but there was no record of whether those recommendations had been followed. Most revealing were a series of letters she had apparently written to her parents in the months before Tyler's birth. The earliest, dated August of that year, was filled with panic and confusion. "Mom and Dad, I don't know what to do. I'm almost 4 months along and I can't hide it much longer. Please don't be disappointed in me. I never meant for this to happen. Jason says he wants nothing to do with it. He says it might not even be his, which is a lie. I've never been with anyone else. I'm scared. I can't be a mother. I can't drop out of school. Please help me figure this out. Love, Morgan Jason." The name triggered a faint memory, a tall, dark-haired boy in her economics class. They had dated briefly, she recalled, but the relationship hadn't been serious. Or had it? The next letter, dated 2 months later, showed a significant shift in tone. "Mom and Dad, thank you for offering to help with the baby. I've been thinking about what you suggested, and I think adoption is the best choice. I'm just not ready to be a mother, and I don't want to give up everything I've worked for. Jason still won't acknowledge any responsibility, and I don't want to force him. It wouldn't be fair to any of us. The doctor says everything looks normal with the pregnancy. I'm doing my best to keep up with classes, but it's getting harder. I appreciate you letting me come home after this semester. It's a relief not having to hide anymore. Love, Morgan." The final letter was dated just a week before the birth, written in a shaky hand that barely resembled her usual neat penmanship. "Mom and Dad, I changed my mind. I can't do this. I can't give it up. Every time I feel it move, I think about holding it, watching it grow up." Jason called yesterday. He says he's been thinking about things and wants to be involved after all. I believe him. I think we could make it work somehow. Please don't be angry with me for changing the plans. I know you've already done so much to prepare, but this is my baby and I need to try. Love, Morgan. Morgan stared at the letter, a cold sense of dread spreading through her chest. If she had changed her mind about the adoption, if she had wanted to keep the baby, what had happened to make her change her mind again? And who was this Jason who had apparently re-entered the picture at the last moment? The final document in the stack provided the most disturbing piece of the puzzle. It was a police report dated January 14th, the day before she was admitted to the hospital. According to the report, officers had responded to a disturbance at her parents' home. A young man identified as Jason Mercer had arrived intoxicated and become verbally abusive, threatening both Morgan and her parents. The report noted that no physical assault had occurred, but Morgan had been visibly distressed by the confrontation. No charges had been filed at the family's request. The next day, she had been admitted to the hospital with preeclampsia, and Tyler had been born. As Morgan struggled to process this new information, her phone rang. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "It's Tyler," said the familiar voice on the other end. "Did you get what I sent?" "Yes," Morgan replied, her voice unsteady. "I'm looking at it now." "Where did you find all this?" "In the attic. Grandma and Grandpa kept everything in a box labeled with my birth date. There's more photo albums, baby clothes, even ultrasound pictures. But these seemed most important." Morgan closed her eyes, trying to absorb the implications of what she had just read. "Tyler, according to these letters, I changed my mind about the adoption. I wanted to keep you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "I know," Tyler finally said. "That's why I wanted you to see them. Something doesn't add up." Morgan thought about the timeline, her apparent decision to keep the baby, the confrontation with Jason, her hospitalization the next day, and then the dissociative episode that had erased her memories of the entire pregnancy and birth. "I need to talk to my parents," she said, a new determination in her voice. "Our parents," she amended. "I thought you might say that," Tyler replied. "That's why I'm calling. They're here with me now. We're all at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I think it's time we had a family meeting." The 3-hour drive to her parents' Connecticut home gave Morgan plenty of time to organize her thoughts. By the time she pulled into the familiar driveway, the initial shock of Tyler's revelations had hardened into a focused determination to uncover the complete truth. Her mother opened the door before Morgan could ring the bell, her face tight with apprehension. "You found the letters," she said, not a question, but a resigned statement of fact. "Tyler found them," Morgan corrected, stepping past her mother into the house. "Why didn't you tell me I wanted to keep him? That I changed my mind about the adoption?" Her mother glanced toward the living room, where Morgan could hear the low murmur of voices. "Let's join the others," she said, avoiding the direct question. "We should only have to go through this once." The scene in the living room was tense. Her father, looking older and frailer than Morgan, remembered sat in his favorite recliner. Valerie occupied one end of the sofa, while Tyler perched uncomfortably on an ottoman, his long legs folded awkwardly beneath him. They all looked up as Morgan entered their expressions, a mix of apprehension and resignation. "Morgan," her father said, his voice weaker than she remembered. "Come sit down." She remained standing, crossing her arms over her chest. "I want to know what happened," she said without preamble. "The letters Tyler found show that I changed my mind about the adoption. I wanted to keep him. So what happened? Why don't I remember any of this?" Her parents exchanged a glance loaded with 19 years of shared secrets. It was her father who finally spoke. "It wasn't as simple as you're making it sound," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You were young, confused. You changed your mind multiple times throughout the pregnancy." "The letters," Morgan began. "The letters show one moment in time," her father interrupted. "One of many moments when you weren't sure what you wanted." "What about Jason?" Morgan asked. "The police report shows he came here the night before I went into labor." What happened? At the mention of the name, her mother visibly flinched. Valerie, who had been uncharacteristically silent, leaned forward. "Who's Jason?" she asked, looking from Morgan to their parents. Tyler's father, Morgan, said, watching her parents' reactions carefully. Apparently, her father sighed heavily, the sound weighted with years of concealed truths. "Jason Mercer," he confirmed. "You dated him for a few months during your sophomore year. When you told him you were pregnant, he initially wanted nothing to do with it. Then, as your due date approached, he suddenly reappeared, claiming he wanted to be involved. But the night before I went into labor, he showed up here drunk." Morgan prompted, piecing together the fragments from the police report. Her mother nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "He was angry, volatile. He accused us of turning you against him, of convincing you to give up the baby when you had initially agreed to try co-parenting. He threatened to take you to court for custody rights." "That's not in the police report," Morgan said. No, her father agreed. "We didn't tell the officers everything. We were trying to protect you to avoid making a bad situation worse." Tyler, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "So what happened after the police left?" Morgan's mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Morgan was distraught. Her blood pressure, which had already been elevated, spiked dangerously. When she started showing other symptoms of preeclampsia the next morning, the doctor decided to induce labor immediately. "And after the birth," Morgan pressed. "What happened then? Why don't I remember any of this?" Her parents exchanged another loaded glance before her father answered. "The birth was difficult. You were exhausted, traumatized. When they finally placed Tyler in your arms, you just shut down. The doctors called it acute stress disorder, possibly triggered by the confrontation with Jason and the physical trauma of the birth. You refused to look at the baby, refused to acknowledge what had happened. By the time you were discharged from the hospital, you had constructed an alternative narrative that you had been away at a special study program, that nothing had changed. And you just went along with this?" Morgan demanded, incredulity, giving her voice a sharp edge. "The psychiatrist advised us to," her mother said defensively. "He said confronting you might cause a more severe breakdown. He recommended giving you time, allowing you to process the trauma gradually in your own way." 19 years isn't gradually, Morgan said, echoing what she had told her mother on the phone days earlier. "It's a lifetime." "We know," her father acknowledged. "As time passed, it became harder and harder to know how to tell you. You seemed so stable. You had built this life for yourself, this identity. We were afraid of what the truth might do to you." Morgan looked at Tyler, seeing the pain and confusion in his eyes. "And what about what it did to him? Did you ever think about that?" Valerie, who had been quietly absorbing the revelations, suddenly stood up. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low and intense. "Don't you dare act like you're the defender of Tyler's interests now, not after 19 years of pretending he didn't exist." "Valerie," their mother cautioned, but Valerie waved away the warning. "No, Mom. She needs to hear this. While you were building your perfect life, Morgan, the rest of us were here picking up the pieces. Mom and Dad raised Tyler as their own, gave him everything they could. I helped whenever they needed me. We formed a family, a real family, without you. And now you want to waltz back in and act like we're the villains in this story." Morgan felt the sting of her sister's words, recognizing the painful truth in them. "You're right," she admitted, surprising everyone in the room, perhaps most of all herself. "I don't get to claim any moral high ground here." Even if I can't remember what happened, I made choices that affected all of you. I'm not trying to undo that or pretend it didn't happen." The admission seemed to deflate Valerie's anger somewhat. She sank back onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "Then what are you trying to do?" Morgan looked at Tyler, who had remained perched on the ottoman, watching the family drama unfold with an unreadable expression. "I'm trying to understand," she said simply. "For my sake, but also for Tyler's. He deserves to know the truth about where he came from." Tyler nodded slightly, acknowledging her words. "What about Jason?" he asked, addressing the room at large. "My father." What happened to him after that night? Morgan's father shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. He tried to contact Morgan a few times after Tyler was born, he admitted. "We discouraged him, told him Morgan wanted nothing to do with him or the baby. Eventually, he stopped trying." "You lied to him," Morgan stated flatly. "We were protecting you," her father insisted. "After what he did, showing up drunk threatening all of us." "What about his rights?" Morgan interrupted. "His right to know his son." Her father's face hardened. "Rights? What about his responsibilities? He abandoned you the moment you told him you were pregnant, only to reappear at the last minute when the hard work was done. He was unstable, unreliable." Maybe Morgan conceded. "But that should have been my decision to make. And Tyler's when he was old enough." The room fell silent as each of them absorbed the weight of 19 years of secrets and half-truths of decisions made with good intentions that had led to unforeseen consequences. "Do you know where he is now?" Tyler asked, finally. Jason Morgan's mother nodded reluctantly. "He's still in Massachusetts. We kept track of him in case there was ever a medical need." Tyler straightened his decision, evident in his posture, before he spoke. "I want to meet him." The modest house in the suburbs of Springfield was well maintained, with a neatly trimmed lawn and hanging baskets of flowers flanking the front door. Morgan sat in her car parked across the street, watching as Tyler double-checked the address on his phone. "This is it," he confirmed, a mixture of nervousness and determination in his voice. Morgan nodded her own emotions, a tangled knot of anxiety and curiosity. After their confrontation at her parents' house, she had offered to accompany Tyler to meet Jason Mercer, the man who, according to family history and her own fragmented memories, was his biological father. The decision to make contact had been Tyler's alone. Morgan had supported him, but made it clear she would follow his lead. Her parents had been less enthusiastic, warning that reopening old wounds might do more harm than good. Valerie surprisingly had sided with Tyler, arguing that he had a right to know his complete history, regardless of how uncomfortable it made the rest of them. "Are you ready?" Morgan asked, watching Tyler's profile as he stared at the house. "No," he admitted, with a small, wry smile. "But I don't think I ever will be, so let's do it anyway." They crossed the street together, approaching the front door with measured steps. Morgan hung back slightly, allowing Tyler to take the lead. He hesitated for just a moment before pressing the doorbell, the chime audible from where they stood. The door opened to reveal a man in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples. He wore jeans and a faded Red Sox t-shirt, and his expression shifted from casual curiosity to shock as he took in the two people standing on his porch. "Morgan," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and something harder to define. "Hello, Jason," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. "It's been a long time." Jason's gaze moved from Morgan to Tyler, his eyes widening as he seemed to register the young man's age and the unmistakable resemblance between them. "Oh my God," he whispered. Tyler cleared his throat. "My name is Tyler Andrews," he said, formally extending his hand. "I believe I'm your son." Jason's hand moved automatically to grasp Tyler's, his eyes never leaving the young man's face. "Tyler," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Your..." 19. Yes, Tyler confirmed. Born January 16th, 19 years ago, Jason nodded slowly, his expression a complex mix of emotions. I know, he said quietly. I've never forgotten the date. An awkward silence descended, broken only when Jason seemed to remember they were still standing on his porch. Please come in, he said, stepping back to allow them entry. My wife and kids are visiting her parents this weekend. We can talk freely. The interior of the house was comfortable and lived in, with family photographs lining the walls of the entryway. Morgan caught glimpses of Jason with a pretty dark-haired woman, 2 young children, a boy and a girl, and an older couple who must be his or his wife's parents. He led them into a sunny living room, cluttered with children's toys, hastily clearing space on the sofa for them to sit. Can I get you something to drink? He offered the automatic hospitality of a host buying time to process the shock of their arrival. Water would be fine, Morgan replied, while Tyler simply shook his head. When Jason returned with a glass of water for Morgan, he sat in an armchair across from them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. How did you find me? He asked. My grandparents, Morgan's parents, kept track of you, Tyler explained. In case there was ever a medical emergency, they said. Jason nodded slowly. That makes sense. Responsible of them? He glanced at Morgan. How much do you remember? About us? About what happened? Morgan took a deep breath, deciding that complete honesty was the only approach that made sense now. Almost nothing, she admitted. According to my family, I experienced some kind of dissociative episode after Tyler's birth. I blocked out the entire pregnancy, the birth, everything. I only learned about Tyler being my biological son a couple of weeks ago when my sister came to me asking for help with his college tuition. Jason's eyebrows rose in surprise. You didn't know? All these years? No, Morgan confirmed. My parents adopted him officially, but raised him as my younger brother. I knew him growing up, but I had no idea he was actually my son. Jason sat back in his chair, visibly processing this information. That explains a lot, he said finally. When I tried to contact you after the birth, your parents told me you wanted nothing to do with me or the baby, that you'd moved on, and I should too. I thought. He trailed off, shaking his head. I thought you hated me that much. I don't remember you, Morgan said gently. Not clearly. Just fragments. But from what my parents have told me, and what I've pieced together, things ended badly between us. Jason's expression darkened. The night before you went into labor, I came to your parents' house. I'd been drinking too much. I was angry because I thought they were forcing you to give up the baby when we'd talked about raising him together. Were we? Morgan asked, genuinely curious. Planning to raise him together, Jason's laugh held no humor. For about a week, maybe. You called me in early January, said you'd changed your mind about the adoption, that you wanted to try to make it work. I was shocked, honestly. I hadn't handled things well when you first told me about the pregnancy. I was scared, immature. But when you called that day, something changed for me. I suddenly realized I wanted to be a father, to take responsibility. So what happened that night? Tyler asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the house. Jason looked at him directly, a mixture of regret and shame crossing his features. I screwed up. Big time. I'd been out with friends drinking to work up the courage to face your grandparents. By the time I got to their house, I was belligerent, accusatory. I said things I shouldn't have, made threats I didn't mean. They called the police, and I was escorted off the property. He turned to Morgan. The next day, when I sobered up and realized what I'd done, I tried calling you to apologize. Your mother answered and told me you'd gone into labor early. When I asked which hospital, she refused to tell me. The narrative matched what Morgan's parents had told them, but hearing it from Jason's perspective added a new dimension to the story. They said, you tried to contact me afterward? Jason nodded. For months. I called, I wrote letters. I even drove by the house a few times, hoping to catch you outside. Eventually, your father threatened a restraining order if I didn't stop. He glanced at Tyler. "I never stopped thinking about you, though. Every year on your birthday, I'd wonder where you were, what you were like." Tyler's expression remained carefully neutral, but Morgan could see the impact of Jason's words in the slight tension of his shoulders. "You have other children now," he observed, gesturing toward the family photos. "Yes," Jason confirmed. "Emma is 8 and Jack is 6. They're amazing kids." He hesitated, then added, "They're your half-siblings. If that's something you'd ever want to. I mean, if you're interested in meeting them." The offer hung in the air, a tentative bridge extended across 19 years of absence. Tyler nodded slowly. "I'd like that, someday. Maybe not right away, but yes." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, each of them contributing pieces to the puzzle of their shared past. Jason showed them photo albums from his college years, including several pictures of him and Morgan together, smiling arms around each other, looking impossibly young. He told them about his job as an architectural engineer, his marriage of 10 years to a kindergarten teacher named Diane, the life he had built after the tumultuous events of his youth. In turn, Tyler shared details of his own life, his academic achievements, his passion for engineering, his plans for Cornell. He asked questions about family medical history, about Jason's parents and siblings, about personality traits they might share. Morgan spoke less than either of them, content to observe the cautious getting to know you dance between father and son. She felt strangely detached from the young woman in the photographs, unable to connect herself to the smiling girl who had apparently once loved the man sitting across from them. As the afternoon waned, Jason looked at Tyler with a directness that had been absent earlier. "I want you to know something," he said. "If I had known for certain that you were my son, if I had been given the chance, I would have been part of your life. I'm not saying I would have been a perfect father, especially not at 19, but I would have tried. I wouldn't have walked away." Tyler nodded, accepting the declaration for what it was, not an excuse for the past, but a truth important for both of them to acknowledge. As they prepared to leave, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch, Jason pulled Morgan aside. "Can we talk for a minute? Just the two of us?" She glanced at Tyler, who nodded, and stepped outside to wait by the car. Once they were alone, Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that triggered a flicker of recognition in Morgan's fragmented memories. "I need to apologize to you," he said, "for that night, for how I handled everything back then. I was young and stupid, but that's no excuse." "I don't remember it," Morgan reminded him gently. "I know," Jason replied, "but I do. And I've carried it with me for 19 years. The thought that I might have contributed to what happened to you, the dissociative episode, all of it, that's been hard to live with." Morgan considered his words carefully. "From what I understand of dissociative amnesia, it's not usually caused by a single event. It's more often a response to an accumulation of stresses and trauma. So, while that night might have been the tipping point, it wasn't the sole cause." Jason nodded, accepting her attempt at absolution, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "What happens now?" he asked. With Tyler with all of this, Morgan glanced out the window to where Tyler waited by her car. "I don't know," she admitted. "Tyler and I are still figuring out our relationship. My entire family is adjusting to the truth being out in the open. Adding you into the mix makes things more complicated, but also more complete in a way. I want to be part of his life," Jason said, "if he'll let me. Not to replace your parents, they raised him. They're his real parents, in all the ways that matter. But I'd like the chance to know my son." "That's up to Tyler," Morgan replied. "But for what it's worth, I think he wants that too. He wouldn't have sought you out otherwise." As she walked toward her car, Morgan felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle that had been broken for 19 years was finally closing. The memories still hadn't returned, and her therapist had suggested they might never fully return, But the narrative of her life was becoming more coherent, the missing pieces filled in not by recovered memories, but by the shared experiences of those who had been there. Tyler was quiet as they drove away from Jason's house, staring out the window as the suburban landscape gave way to the highway. "He seems like a good person," he said finally. "Yes," Morgan agreed. "He does." "He has a whole life," Tyler continued. "A family." Morgan glanced at him, hearing the unspoken question in his observation. "That doesn't mean there isn't room for you in it," she said. "If that's what you want." Tyler nodded slowly. "I think it is. Not right away maybe, but eventually." He turned to look at her directly. "What about us? What happens with us now?" It was the question that had been hanging between them since the moment Morgan had learned the truth. What kind of relationship could they build now after 19 years of a very different dynamic? "Whatever we want to make happen," Morgan said carefully. "I'm not trying to become your mother in the traditional sense. That role belongs to my parents, to your grandparents. They raised you, they loved you every day of your life. I won't try to replace that." But Tyler prompted, "But I'd like to be part of your life in a more meaningful way. I'd like to get to know you, the real you, not the nephew I kept at arm's length, and I'd like you to know me." She hesitated, then added, "If that's something you want." Tyler was quiet for a long moment, watching the scenery pass outside the car window. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I'm not ready to call you mom or anything. That would be... they're weird after all this time. But I think I'd like to know you better." The admission, simple as it was, felt like a gift. Morgan smiled, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. "Then, that's where we'll start." 6 months later, Morgan sat in the bleachers of the gymnasium at Cornell University, watching as Tyler and his teammates warmed up for the intramural volleyball match. She hadn't expected him to invite her to the game. Their relationship was still evolving, marked by cautious steps toward greater closeness, and the text message asking if she'd like to come had been a pleasant surprise. She wasn't alone in the stands. Her parents sat beside her, bundled against the January chill that seemed to permeate even the indoor space. Her father, looking stronger than he had in months, thanks to a new medication regimen, leaned forward eagerly, pointing out Tyler's position on the court. Her mother clutched a small digital camera, determined to document every moment of her grandson's collegiate athletic career, however modest. On Morgan's other side sat Jason and his wife Diane, who had driven up from Massachusetts with their 2 children. Emma, at 8, was fascinated by the college environment and had barely stopped chattering since their arrival. 6-year-old Jack, meanwhile, was focused entirely on his half-brother on the court, watching Tyler's every move with undisguised hero worship. The past 6 months had been a period of profound adjustment for all of them. After the initial revelations and confrontations, they had each retreated to process what had happened. Morgan had continued with therapy, working to understand the psychological mechanisms that had allowed her to block out such a significant event in her life. Her parents had struggled with guilt over their decades-long deception, however well-intentioned it might have been. Valerie had gradually softened her stance, moving from anger to a tentative acceptance of the new family dynamic. Tyler had thrown himself into his first semester at Cornell, establishing himself as a dedicated student and finding community among his peers. He had maintained regular contact with Morgan through texts and occasional video calls, their conversations gradually evolving from awkward and stilted to something approaching comfortable. He had also begun building a relationship with Jason and his family, spending a weekend with them during fall break and including them in his expanding definition of family. As promised, Morgan had covered Tyler's educational expenses without condition or expectation. The financial support was the easy part. Navigating the emotional terrain of their new relationship was far more complex. They were neither mother and son in the conventional sense, nor were they simply aunt and nephew anymore. They were creating something new, a relationship without a clear social template but meaningful nonetheless. "There he is!" Emma suddenly squealed, pointing as Tyler moved to the front of the court. "Tyler's serving." They all watched as he tossed the ball high, his form perfect as he sent it sailing over the net. Morgan felt a surge of pride that surprised her with its intensity. This talented, determined young man was in some biological sense an extension of herself, a connection she was only now beginning to fully comprehend. After the match, which Tyler's team won handily, they all gathered for dinner at a local restaurant. The conversation flowed easily, moving from Tyler's classes to Emma's dance recital to Jason's latest architectural project. Morgan observed the interactions with a sense of wonder, marveling at how this unconventional family configuration had evolved so naturally over such a relatively short time. As the evening wound down, Tyler pulled Morgan aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his backpack and extracting a slim-wrapped package. "It's kind of late for Christmas, but I wanted to give it to you in person." Morgan unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal. Opening it, she found Tyler's neat handwriting filling the first page. "For new memories. The past is what it is, but the future is unwritten." The simple message brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said, touching the page gently. "This means a lot." Tyler nodded, a smile quirking the corner of his mouth. "I thought maybe we could both write in it sometimes. When there's something important we want to remember." The suggestion held layers of meaning, an acknowledgement of the memories lost, a commitment to preserving those yet to be made, a shared project that belonged to just the two of them. "I'd like that," Morgan said, closing the journal carefully. As they rejoined the others, Morgan felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for months. The family secret that had exploded into their lives had caused pain and disruption, but it had also cleared away decades of unacknowledged tension and guilt. In its place, something new was growing, not a perfect fairy tale reconciliation, but an honest reckoning with the past and a cautious hope for the future. That night in her hotel room, Morgan opened the journal again and began to write, "Today I watched my son play volleyball. I cheered when he scored. I sat beside his father, whom I barely remember loving, but who has become someone I respect. I felt my parents' presence beside me, their love for Tyler as deep and true as any biological connection could be. I saw his siblings, his half-siblings, look up to him with admiration. 19 years ago, I made choices I can't remember for reasons I may never fully understand. Those choices caused pain, created secrets, altered the course of multiple lives. But they also created Tyler, who is remarkable in ways I can take no credit for, but can appreciate with my whole heart. I don't know what to call this family we're creating. It doesn't fit any conventional model, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we get to define it for ourselves day by day, choice by choice. Maybe that's the gift hidden within all this complicated history, the freedom to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. Hey everyone, what a journey we've been on with Morgan and Tyler. I'd love to know if you've ever experienced a family revelation that changed everything you thought you knew. Has karma ever circled back in your life the way it did in this story? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this family drama resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories with unexpected twists, and share with someone who appreciates how complicated family relationships can be. Thank you so much for watching my story about finding truth and redemption in the most unexpected places. Until next time, remember that sometimes life's biggest challenges can lead to our most meaningful connections.